Salutations, fellow readers, writers, and killers of time on YouTube. My name is Martha Jones, and I would like to use the androgynous sounds of my voice to share with you a few words about The Picture of Dorian Gray, first published as a novella in 1899 by Lippincott's Monthly Magazine, and again in 1890 as a full-length novel. Dorian's story was not the first horror comedy brainchild to be fathered by Irish-born author and playwright Oscar Wilde. And I don't know if that is a me thing to presume if Oscar Wilde did comedy, or if that is pretty consistent among literature lovers, but for some reason he never registers as anything more than a comedy writer. Like, every 5 years or so, I will relearn that Oscar Wilde was the author responsible for The Canterville Ghost, and then I'll forget it and relearn in another 5 years, because the idea of Oscar Wilde as a horror writer just kind of slides off my brain. And when I asked the internet about the history of horror comedy, it seemed to think that the genre began with the gallows humor of Edgar Allan Poe, then peaked at some point after Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. And more prolific classic readers than I am, please feel free to weigh in the comments. But as far as I can see, Mr. Wilde might have been the first author who kind of found the semi-appropriate balance between horror and comedy. Not that you'd know by looking at the assorted movie adaptations, which without exception seem to favor the horror elements of Dorian Gray and leave the comedy out of it. And I feel like that's a dirty shame, because The Picture of Dorian Gray is only about half slow burn gothic horror. The other half is witty banter between characters about the nature of life, death, and challenges to the concept of aging gracefully. And this banter is screaming out to be made into a stage show. If someone told me that this was the closet prequel to The Importance of Being Earnest, I would absolutely believe them. This, in my opinion, is both a mark in favor and against the book, because on one hand, the dialogue is clever and witty and amazing, and I love it. On the other hand, the characters don't necessarily have distinct voices all the time, so the illusion that Dorian Gray is addressing Lord Henry wears off pretty quick, and it's pretty much just Oscar Wilde addressing Oscar Wilde. But this author, possibly more than any other of his era, cranked out memeable phrases at a blistering pace. It's not exactly like you could pick a page and point to it and find tattoo-worthy quotes, but probably ones by which you could sell t-shirts pretty good, if you know what I'm saying.
Young men want to be faithful and are not. Old men want to be faithless and cannot. I don't want money. It is only people who pay their bills who want that, and I never pay mine. She behaves as if she was beautiful. Most American women do. It is the secret of their charm. Can you remember any great error that you committed in your early days, Duchess? A great many, I fear, she cried. Then commit them over again, he said gravely. To get back one's youth, one merely has to repeat one's follies. Nowadays, most people die of sort of a creeping common sense, and to discover only when it is too late that the only things one never regrets are one's mistakes.
And I love it, it's amazing, but it's pretty inescapable that Oscar Wilde is kind of quoting himself to himself. In fact, while I can't prove that this is the aesthetic reason why Ben Barnes as Dorian Gray ended up looking suspiciously like Oscar Wilde, once you see it, the similarity is pretty striking. Now, much ado has been made over the gay subtext of Dorian Gray. The gay text is that Basil, the artist responsible for Mr. Gray's famous picture, states plainly and passionately that he loves Dorian. Dorian's become Basil's muse, and that is why he paints the guy with such a loving, exact hand. And while Dorian gives the impression that he is an equal opportunity debaucher who would cheerfully use any number of boys and girls for sex, when it comes to the character of Basil, the love is not reciprocated, at least not in the book. So the gayness factors into the plot, but not hugely. I mean, I cannot understate how brave it was for Mr. Wilde to write a gay character who prays for the soul of the villain. The climate in which he wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray was one in which you could sue a horrible woman for slander, and she could countersue you for being gay, and you could do hard time. Which is a thing that happened to Mr. Wilde. He ended up doing some hard time because he lost a pissing match with his boyfriend's wealthy mama. Not only was Dorian's story published in this incredibly inhospitable climate for homosexuals, it was published twice. Must have struck a cultural chord, yeah? Yet the ahead-of-its-time representation is only a tiny part of what makes this book fascinating. If ever a well-meaning evangelical type overheard you express your desire to read this book, then sent you to a Pray Away the Gray camp, you might realistically come to read it as an adult and wonder what on earth the excitement was about. Anyway, if the story is unfamiliar to you, it is one in which boy meets artist, artist paints boy, boy meets his mentor in wickedness, aka Lord Henry, who sees a very pretty young man in the artist's studio and says, "Pretty face you got there, kid. Enjoy it while it lasts. There is nothing worse than getting old and ugly, am I right?" Boy goes, "Ah!" and wishes with all his heart that his portrait could grow old while he remains young, even going so far as to offer his soul in exchange. Boy meets girl, girl loves boy. Boy thinks he loves girl until she gives a disappointing performance as Juliet, after which he tactfully responds, I hate you, you're dead to me, the engagement's off." Overcome with grief, girl takes her own life, boy takes zero responsibility, and the painting appears to develop a cruel sneer. And that is the start of Dorian Gray's transformation. From there, the story takes a bit of a jaunt away from the mirroring of Faust with its devilish bargains and his black omens to what strikes me as an apt parallel to the Book of Ecclesiastes. See, when Dorian, like King Solomon before him, grows bored with love, being a wealthy young man with slightly too much time on his hands, he spends a few years in pursuit of knowledge. And the quest for knowledge indeed seems to stimulate him for a while. He learns about jewelry, textiles, antiquity, history, all under the subtle mentorship of Lord Henry, the sort of devil on his shoulder, who regularly reassures him that pleasure, albeit fleeting, is the only thing worth pursuing in life. And like King Solomon before him, Dorian feels empowered to do his dirty deeds by a bargain struck long ago with poorly understood powers that be. Where Solomon and Dorian's paths diverge as protagonists is that near the end of his life, when he pens Ecclesiastes, King Solomon acknowledges that pleasure isn't everything, our ability to find lingering contentment in this life has its limits, and maybe it's best not to take the happenings of this life too seriously. No such growth occurs in Dorian Gray, and the only semblance of a conscience we see for him is Basil's telltale portrait, which... Okay, for some reason multiple adapters of the story are fond of the idea that Dorian isn't supposed to look at the painting or he'll die. That's not the case. In fact, Dorian goes through long phases in which he is constantly looking at the painting in morbid fascination as it decays while he himself remains beautiful. A clinician might disagree with me, but Dorian's obsession with the painting actually reminds me a little bit of a condition called Body Dysmorphic Disorder, a potentially debilitating mental condition wherein, according to the Mayo Clinic, a person becomes extremely preoccupied with a perceived flaw in appearance that to others can't be seen or appears minor, a malady that can lead to multiple hours of staring at one's reflection each day, and a fear that looking away from one's reflection will allow the flaws to grow worse when one isn't looking at them. Eventually, however, the grotesque image Dorian sees in the portrait starts to bother him, so much that he hides it behind a screen. And he can tell himself he's not responsible for the death of the fiancée he jilted, or the brother who tried to avenge her, or the nice artist man who dared to pray for him when he learned what was happening to his friend, or the suicide of the doctor he blackmailed into helping him dispose of Basil's body. But when next Dorian views the painting, not only has it gotten appreciably older and uglier with wear and tear that comes from years spent in brothels and opium dens, its hands have grown terribly stained with blood. In the end, spoilers, I guess, Dorian gets the idea that if he destroys the painting, his conscience will no longer trouble him. But when he attempts to stab the painting, he himself shrieks in agony and collapses in a wretched heap on the floor. The picture is restored to its former radiance, and the servants get to ponder the surreal implications of the unrecognizable decrepit man who died wearing the master's jewelry. Now, despite some of the more brutal aspects of the story, the brutal murders, the abrupt aging, the supernatural element of the painting, none of that stuff actually horrifies me. What horrifies me is how completely Dorian misunderstood the deal he made in his errant youth with powers unknown. What he thought he had done was channel the curse of aging into his portrait. What he had actually done was trade the maturity that comes with age and equips us to handle a lot of scary, uncomfortable parts of life for the false flower of youth. So he can get smart and drunk and oversexed all he wants, but without the self-acceptance that comes from looking your demons in the eye and saying, all right then. All that lovely hedonism is wasted. Every knowledge quest is frustrated because Dorian is incapable of reflecting on any nugget of knowledge that he unearths as more than an object for his temporary amusement. He can never truly love anyone because he never sees people as more than a passing fancy to keep him from getting bored for a minute. And for as many human beings as I've met in my lifetime who share the exact views of Dorian Gray, that scares the hell out of me. Oh, I'm so glad that I'm now young. As always, thank you for giving these videos a shot. I post whenever I can. Anytime, take it easy. Love you. Bye.